Hello, I'm Emily Walker with the U.S. Embassy Algiers, and this is Let's Chat, a program brought to you by the American Cultural Center Algiers. The U.S. Embassy has 5 American Cultural Centers around the country of Algeria. In addition to Algiers, there's one in Oran, Constantine, Béchar, and Ouargla. They're a great place to learn about American culture, practice English, and listen to talks like the one you're about to hear. So it's Wednesday, November 4th, 2020, the day after our elections in the United States. For these Let's Chat programs, we like to share with you some aspect of American culture. We've had shows on American football, on the Civil Rights Act, and on what it's like to be a college student in the United States. And today we're going to talk about an extremely important piece of American culture, the presidential elections that take place every 4 years. So as of now, 6 p.m. in Algiers, we don't know whether the next president of the United States will be our current president, Republican Donald Trump, or Joe Biden, a Democrat and former vice president under Barack Obama. Neither candidate currently has the required 270 Electoral College votes to be declared a winner. While every vote in the United States is counted, it's taking time to count those ballots, and this is normal. We'll talk a little bit more about that process with our guests. So I'd love to introduce to you our guests. We have 2 American diplomats who work at the U.S. Embassy Algiers. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Rosalind Ramos and Eric Barbie. Rosalind's the head of the political economic section at the U.S. Embassy Algiers. Her overseas tours have included Amman, Jordan, Abu Dhabi, Ecuador, and Mexico City. Prior to joining the diplomatic corps, she was a civil litigation attorney in Baltimore. Eric Barbie is the head of the public affairs section at the U.S. Embassy Algiers. He's been posted to Amman, Jordan, also Jerusalem, Baghdad, Montreal, and Sudan. Prior to joining the Foreign Service, he was a Peace Corps volunteer in Dominica and also a contractor for the United States Department of Defense. So for those of you watching live on YouTube, you can ask questions about the US presidential elections in the chat, and I will try to get those questions to Eric and Rosalind for some answers. But I'd like to start first by asking both of my guests what voting was like for them this year. Living outside the US means we can't stand in line at a polling location in our hometowns and cast our ballots in person. So I'm curious, what was voting like this year? Can I start with you, Eric? How did voting go for you this year?
Yeah, great. Emily, thank you. And thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in. If I don't make any sense, please stop me. I'm actually quite exhausted because I stayed up quite late and got up really early, watching the elections. So I'm physically tired and also a little emotionally drained as we're waiting for these results. So please stop me if I'm not making sense. So how did I vote this year? It was a pretty straightforward process, to be honest. I requested an overseas ballot, and my county emailed me a ballot. I then printed it up and filled out the ballot, and then put it into 2 envelopes. I put the ballot itself into one envelope, and then a cover sheet with my signature so that they could verify I'm a legal, valid voter. And then put that in and then delivered it to the embassy, and the embassy forwarded it back to the United States. So it was a pretty straightforward process. I feel quite confident that it is a credible process, that there's no potential for fraud. And I've actually been in touch with my county back home about the process. And they've been really helpful. I've been emailing back and forth with them. So that's how I voted. Thanks, Emily.
And Rosalind, how about you? How did voting go for you this year?
Thanks, Emily, and welcome to everyone. So similarly to Eric, I also voted via absentee ballot this year. In order to obtain my ballot, I had to first verify my identity online with Montgomery County Board of Elections in Maryland, which is the state where I'm registered to vote, my home state. And once the board verified my identity, then they were able to mail me my ballot here in Algiers. It took quite a long time to actually get here. For a while, I thought I wasn't going to make it here on time for me to get it back, but luckily it did. So I was able to mail it back to the board before Election Day. And then I was able, similarly to Eric, to track my ballot online. Just quickly to add, because we have a federal system and every state has different deadlines for receiving absentee ballots, Maryland, for example, recommended that everyone submit their ballots, their absentee ballots, as soon as possible. And said the board has to receive it no later than November 13th for it to be counted. So this is something that varies by state, but that's how I voted this year.
Thank you for that. So as I mentioned, we have these presidential elections every 4 years. This is neither of your first time voting in a presidential election. I'd love to hear if you have any particularly strong memories of voting in past elections. Eric?
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that comes to mind is the little elementary school that I attended as a kid. Obviously, I was not voting in presidential elections at that time, but it was fascinating to see that school transform into an actual polling place. And I remember, seeing the cafeteria tables, the place where we'd eat food every day or get into the little food fights with, my little second and third grade friends, see that transform into a place where people could actually go and vote and participate in our democracy. And it was not only the physical place, but the people changed as well. So volunteers from all over the community, friends, mothers, dads, whatnot, would come in and volunteer their own time to help, register people, get them set up, and make sure that the process was credible and fair. And I know this year there was a call for a lot of volunteers, because of COVID-19. Historically, a lot of these volunteers have been retirees, older folks, and many of them were not comfortable dealing with the public due to the pandemic. And so a number of celebrities and others came out and called for volunteers, and the response was overwhelming. More than 700,000 people responded to that, and there were more than enough volunteers to staff the elections. And I saw many of my friends actually took the day off of work, went and worked at a poll to make sure that this democracy works.
Thank you for that, especially the memory of your elementary school cafeteria being turned into a voting center. I imagine that would stick with somebody. Rosalind, what about you? Do you have any particularly strong memories of voting in past elections?
Yeah, so my memories also go back to childhood. My first time voting in a presidential election was actually in the year 2000. But as Americans, the concept and importance of voting is something that's really deeply rooted in us from a young age. And it's something that we learn about in school from really primary grades up and through high school. So as an example of that, my daughter, my oldest daughter, who's in first grade here, attending the American school in Algiers, she had a lesson about voting and the importance of upholding civic duties last month in the run-up to the presidential election. And so she and her classmates had the opportunity to vote on their class name, and she was so excited about being able to vote for that, and even more excited when the name she voted for won. Also, last year and earlier this year, my husband and I were able to take our kids with us to vote in person on local and presidential elections. So we do this because, the goal for us is to teach our children about civic duty, and we think this is going to make them more active participants in our democracy. Voting is really the most accessible and fundamental method of activism that we can engage in, and really the most effective way that we have to bring meaningful political and societal change. So, I've only actually voted in person for a presidential election once, and that was in 2008. In 2000 and 2004, I was a college student away from my home state, so I had to vote via absentee ballot as well. And as far as recalling my first time voting in the presidential election in 2000, I could say that it was kind of, because there's a lot that it actually is on a ballot for president, for congressional representatives, amendments to local laws. So as a voter, you have to do your research, you have to be a responsible voter, to know, who and what is going to be on the ballot to help inform your decision of how you're going to vote.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. And everyone on YouTube, I see that there is a lot of punditry going on in the chat. People are making lots of predictions about whether it's going to be Biden or Trump. So I just want to point out that my guests today are not actually political pundits. They're both Foreign Service officers for the U.S. Department of State. So most Foreign Service officers keep doing their work overseas under different presidents, sometimes Democrat, sometimes Republican, during the course of their careers. So maybe you could address that, Eric. Is that a difficult thing, working under different administrations?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I've been a diplomat for about 15 years. I've worked under 3 different presidents, 2 Republican, 1 Democrat. When we become Foreign Service officers, we actually take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and we pledge to remain above, partisan politics. And so, it is an interesting position to be in because we're diplomats. We love politics. We also want to know who our next boss is going to be. And so that's an important thing. But we've taken a pledge to work for the elected president of the United States, whomever that may be. And that is our job and duty. And so above all, I represent my country abroad, not any political party. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you for that. I have a question here that came in on YouTube from IRS, is their name, who wants to know what's the difference between the popular vote and the Electoral College. This is a common question. I think Americans are not even 100% clear on what the Electoral College is. So perhaps we can ask one of our guests to shed a little bit light. This is how we elect our president, the Electoral College. What the heck is it? Rosalind?
Sure, I'm happy to try to answer that. It is a very tricky question, one which also, I think confuses a lot of Americans as well. So while the popular vote elects members of Congress, mayors, governors, state legislators, it does not determine the winner of the presidency. That important decision ultimately falls to the Electoral College. So when Americans cast their ballots in a presidential election, what they're actually doing is voting for a slate of electors who are appointed by their state's political parties and who pledge to support that party's candidates. So in all, there are 538 electoral votes. And to become president, the candidate must acquire 270 of those votes, so a majority of those votes. Each state is allocated a number of votes equal to the number of seats that they have in our House of Representatives, which is the lower house of our parliament, plus 2 seats, plus 2 votes for its senators. So that means that low population states like Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska, they get less electoral votes, and more populated states get more. So California, which is the most populated state that we have, gets 55 electoral votes. Typically, when a presidential candidate wins the popular vote in a state on election day, they claim all of that state's electoral votes. So that's what we mean by a winner takes all system, right? And this has been the norm pretty much since the beginning. It exists in every state except Maine and Nebraska. And as we've seen, this can result in a candidate losing the popular vote, but still becoming the president. This is what happened in 2016. Although Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote by almost 3 million votes, President Trump garnered almost 57% of the electoral votes, enough to win the presidency. The same thing happened in 2000 between Al Gore and former President George W. Bush.
Okay, thanks for that primer. I know it's a very complicated system. Fia on YouTube just commented that the Electoral College system is the best way to give every state a fair chance at voicing their opinion. So that's part of the reason it was established too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Rosalind, you just froze, but if you can still hear me there, Eric, there's lots of questions coming in about when we're going to know who the president is. Why don't we know yet? People are talking about different returns from different states coming in. So Eric, maybe you could address that. Why don't we know who the president is yet? And is this normal?
So that is the $1 million question. I'm right with you, with all of the people that put forward that question. So, I mean, it really would be nice to have a winner at this point, but it's too close to call. And we have a number of states where the count is ongoing, number one, or number two, it's just too close to call. And so they need to be very, very careful. But I would emphasize that this is not the first time we've experienced something like this. Rosalind mentioned the 2000 election, Bush-Gore, where the focus was really on Florida. And the race came down to really 500 votes in Florida. And it took over 30 days for them to go ahead and make a decision. It went to the courts as to whether there would be a recount, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that there would not be, and George Bush became our president. So, I mean, this has happened in the past. Also, it's happened in the, several hundred years ago in 1800 with Jefferson and Burr, it occurred. And then in 1824 with Adams and Jackson, some very similar things happened. So the system is set up to allow time and to encourage people to be patient. And the Electoral College will not actually cast their votes until December 14th. So like all of you, I want to know the answer as well. That's part of the reason I stayed up all night. But at the end of the day, we just all need to be patient and wait and see and let the system work. That's it.
So we all just need to be patient and continue to be glued to the internet and glued to the TV to watch these results. Yes. So we have a question that just came in from WSS James 23, who asks, how can you explain the dramatic change for Michigan and Wisconsin in favor of Biden? So maybe if one of you wants to address what this is referring to is last time those states favored Trump and this time they're appearing to favor Biden. If one of you wants to address that, that the nature of changing political allegiances in states. We have 50 states in the United States and they're not always the same. If either of you wants to talk about that.
Maybe I would just say that, democracy continues to evolve in the United States. We've seen that throughout our over, several hundred years. Political parties, they grow, they change. Demographics within states change. And so, it's a good question. It's a complicated question. I don't know, Rosalind, Emily, you know these states as well. So I don't want to take too much time, but I would just say that this is kind of a natural evolution of a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with Eric, and I think that there are a number of of states in the U.S. that are considered more or less like purple states, right? So it means they're not necessarily as clean cut, being Republican or Democrat, and can kind of shift back and forth between, or the populations within those states can shift back and forth between both parties. So I think that's actually something that is increasingly common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree and say that, that changing nature of states' demographics and maybe political opinions is kind of a good thing. We probably don't want every state to just be one way forever. The United States is a constantly evolving project. So it's maybe not so surprising that some states that used to be Republican flip to Democrat and vice versa, I think. Okay, let's see if we have some more questions coming in here. It's a lot of comments and not so many questions on here. So I'm going to ask you a question of my own. So we've all talked about how we're glued to the news. We can't look away from the internet. We're watching cable news coverage. We're reading, newspapers online. As you continue to do that for the rest of the night and possibly into tomorrow until we know the final result, is there anything particular that either of you guys will be watching for? Rosalind?
So, I mean, at this point, I think most people are focused on the key the key states where we're still waiting to get some more clarity. As Eric had mentioned, there are a number of states that, where we're still counting, particularly a lot of the absentee ballots or mail-in ballots that were sent in. So this is a process that's going to take time. And those are the states that I'm honestly paying attention to now. And those are some of the states where it's really right now, the polling or the numbers are very close. It's all right. It's very close election. So those additional ballots that are still being counted are really going to be, what the result.
I think we just lost Eric. The connection doesn't seem to be so great. Can you still hear me, Rosalind?
It freezes up a little bit, so I'm also having some connectivity issues, but I'm still here. I hear you.
Okay, you're back for now. Okay, well, we'll try to get Eric back on the call. I think that he had an internet problem. But in the meantime, let me ask you, well, I want to save this question to when Eric comes back. So let me just see if there's any more questions coming in on the YouTube chat here.
Sure. I think Eric's coming back now.
Yep. Sorry about that. My internet seems to have dropped for a minute. Apologies.
No problem. I'm sure everyone watching on YouTube can relate to not having the best internet connection. So, okay, guys. So a lot of people on the YouTube chat are saying who they're going to vote for, and I think they really want to know who you guys might vote for. I know you're not pollsters or pundits, but lots of folks are asking. So, can I ask you, what do you think is going to happen, Eric?
I don't know. I'm reading the news sites along with everybody else. I'm not going to reveal who I voted for. I don't think that's fair given my position. I would just say that it's a really, really interesting time to be watching this, and this is democracy at work. I've had conversations with friends and family back home who have voted differently than I have. And to exchange viewpoints about why they voted the way they did and why I voted the way I did. It's obviously a very close race and it's exciting. Part of the reason I couldn't sleep last night because it's quite interesting. It's a complex system, and we're all anxious to see how this is going to go. The other thing that I think is a really good sign for American democracy is just the number of people that turned out. We're talking highest voter turnout in a very, very long time. Over 150 million people are predicted to participate in the election at the end of the day when they count all this up. I think we're over 65% voter turnout among registered voters. So this is democracy at work. And I have to say I'm proud that the elections have been peaceful so far. There have been no instances of violence, and people came out to vote, and that bodes well for American democracy. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so I couldn't get Eric to say who he's going to vote for. Rosalind, who are you gonna vote for? Who do you think's gonna win?
So my lips are sealed on both accounts. As I mentioned earlier, really the race is really tight. There are a few states that are still need to count some of these ballots. So it's really too close to say right now. I'm not going to go out there and make a predicament. I'm going to be watching like everybody else. And as a civil servant, again, that's my lips are sealed on my votes. It's a very personal thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Voting aside from we are employees of the government, and this is not something that we would say publicly, but it's also honestly in the United States, voting can be a very private thing too. I think Eric mentioned earlier that his ballot came sealed in a confidential envelope and you put it inside something else. It's a very confidential thing. People in the same family sometimes don't even discuss who they vote for. Some people do, but some people don't discuss politics and religion, and I think that's pretty true across cultures.
Emily, upon thinking about it a little bit more, I am willing to make one prediction.
Okay.
And this is applicable to Algeria. What I would say is that whoever sits in the White House, they're going to continue to give some focus and attention to Algeria and work to strengthen the relationship with Algeria. So I would venture to say, that in terms of the way the United States works with Algeria, that's not going to change. Things are only going to get stronger, and we've seen that in the last month. Over the course of the last month, 6 weeks, we've had 3 major military visits. We had the AFRICOM commander, we had the Secretary of Defense, and then we just had the ship visit of the USS Roosevelt. Nation, right. We have the United States will be the country of honor at the upcoming trade fair, next year. We have a lot of U.S. businesses that are expanding here in Algeria and showing a lot of interest here. And we're doing so much in the cultural and education space. And, given my public affairs hat, I could go on and on about that, but I will not. The topic of the day is not that. And so I will turn it back to you. But I would make the prediction that our relationship is going to continue to strengthen.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks for that, Eric. We have a couple of people who are asking on YouTube about the two-party system that we have in the United States. Nora Mo wants to know, why is it always a two-party system? Sharufa asks, are there any independent candidates? If either of you want to address that. Why just Democrats and Republicans?
Sure, I could take a stab at that one. So, electoral politics, major political party. Is really, at the end of the day, there's little incentive to support a third party candidate, as voters are going to choose candidates who are most likely to win. So I can tell you, in this particular election and in the last few that I voted, there have been independent candidates on the ballot. But again, voters are not going to be incentivized to pick those candidates because they're going to want to pick the top two that have the biggest chance of winning.
Want to add anything to that, Eric? Do you think that we could ever have another party besides Democrats and Republicans, or?
There have been attempts, and I think political scientists and others have good answers why there hasn't been the evolution of a third party that has been really strong and competitive in the elections. So there's some good materials out there for people who are interested in this topic. I think given the nature of the Electoral College, I think there are advantages to having just two parties. But people much wiser than myself have addressed this, and would be happy to provide some links and whatnot to folks who are interested in that topic. Back to you.
Okay, Eric, you touched on this a bit with your comment about that we're going to continue being friends of Algeria. Us as Foreign Service officers will continue being here and interacting with Algerians. What are your thoughts on this job that we have, foreign diplomacy, international diplomacy? How much does it change under different administrations?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends where you are, I would say, first and foremost. What is occurring in the world? Rosa and I have served around the region. We've served outside of Middle East and North Africa. I would say that, like any country in the world, the United States attempts to defend its interests, and that is first and foremost when it comes to foreign policy. I would emphasize, from my perspective, working across administrations, that there is continuity in foreign policy, even when there's a shift between parties. I think you get some more dramatic changes, perhaps in domestic policy back home. But at the end of the day, we are working to advance the bilateral relationship between whatever country we're working in, and advance the interests of the United States, as Algerian diplomats do around the world for their country. So I would emphasize continuity as opposed to change. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Anything you want to add to that, Rosalind? Okay, otherwise, I think, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, no, not really. I agree with everything that Eric said. I think there's definitely, we can expect a lot more continuity if there is a change in administration. And, I think that the transfer of power is something that is really like a respected tradition. And I can say for the State Department, it's something that they prepare for months and take very seriously, and they do it in a very professional fashion. So yeah, I would agree with everything Eric said.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And it does seem like this election was peaceful and fairly orderly. So I think that that's, a good thing to see. So I think we'll just wrap it up here. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching on YouTube. I'd like to ask each of our guests here if you guys want to have any final thoughts on the election, or if you want to share how you'll spend the rest of your evening watching the results, if you will be doing that.
Thanks for the opportunity, Emily. I mean, I guess one thing that's important for all of us in this day and age is to verify information. So check your sources. And I think we have to, particularly at a time like this, I'm encouraging all my friends and family back home to be really diligent and not just accept things that are passed on social media, but to really do fact checking and, be critical readers of anything that passes across your screen. So that's number one. Number two, I think it would be great to, continue the conversation on our social media platforms. We have some, great folks at the embassy, Khaled and Salman and Adam and Emily and others that really read every single comment and question that comes our way. In this conversation about U.S. elections, about democracy, about developments in the United States is going to continue over the coming days. And so we look forward to being in touch there. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Eric. And Rosalind, how about you? How will you be spending tonight? And do you have any parting thoughts about presidential elections in the United States?
So unlike Eric, I feel like I'm going to have maybe my night of staying up or, not going to sleep very early tonight, because last night I thought, well, by the time I wake up, there'll probably be some more clarity. So I actually slept quite well last night, a little bit of jitters, but I think tonight, as I see the races getting tighter and tighter, and potentially having some of these some of the states come out saying who the winner is, I think I'm going to be glued to Twitter and these CNN updates that come on my phone every couple of minutes. So we'll see what kind of shape I'm in tomorrow.
We'll all see that. Thank you, guys. I know I said that was just going to be the end, but there is a question that just came in that Khaled would like me to answer. This is from Sofian Tim Toussaint, who wants to know whether there might be another attempt to abolish the Electoral College after this election. So Rosalind, maybe you want to take that one since you had a great explanation of what the Electoral College is. Do you think after this election that there will be an attempt to abolish the Electoral College?
Rosalind? So, I mean, really, it's going to be an uphill battle. Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
Can you hear me? I'm speaking. Okay. All right. No, so honestly, I think it's going to be an uphill battle. This is something that was established in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention. It's been in place for over 200 years. It's likely that we're going to have the same system in place for the foreseeable future. I think, to change it really does require a lot. What it requires is a constitutional amendment, essentially, and that's going to require 2/3 approval from both the House and the Senate and ratification by the state. So that's no easy task. And that's why I would think, this is something that's unlikely to happen anytime in the near future.
Okay, so unlikely. Okay, guys, well, with that, we are going to wrap up. Thank you so much to both of my guests for giving your time and your insights into the exciting moment in history that we are all a part of right now. Thank you, everyone on YouTube for being interested in U.S. politics. There's a lot of interest in it. There's a robust conversation on the YouTube page. Guys, if you don't already subscribe to our YouTube page, please hit the red subscribe button. We do talks like this most every Wednesday. So if you subscribe, you won't miss out on those. Thank you again so much, Eric, Rosalind. Thank you everyone for watching. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks.